to AC/DC Beyond the Thunder, the podcast with the biggest balls of all. With your hosts, Kurt Squires and Greg Ferguson. It's time to rock.
Welcome to the podcast with the biggest balls of all. It's AC/DC Beyond the Thunder. I'm your host, Kurt Squires, who along with my good friend Greg Ferguson have traveled the earth to seek out the most extraordinary AC/DC stories to be told in our never-ending search to find out just how this band has influenced so many extraordinary individuals along the way. And that's our trusty audio engineer over there, Eric Kielb, in the sound booth. And speaking of sound, our next guest does in fact sport a golden pair of ears. A man who's amassed nearly 300 productions to his resume and counting, with such bands as, check this out, listeners, The Cult, Metallica, Dio, Corrosion of Conformity, Joe Satriani, Slipknot, Whitesnake, Van Halen, Motley Crue, Elvis Costello, Chickenfoot, Norah Jones, and the list goes on. But most importantly for this episode, every single AC/DC release since 1990. That's right, we give you from his hometown of Vancouver, British Columbia, the sixth member of AC/DC, Mike Fraser. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Good.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We thought we'd start out the show with your title. Your current title is record producer, engineer, and mixer. We were wondering if you could briefly define in layman's terms each of those job titles.
Start with producer because that'll kind of go down the chain a bit.
Okay.
The producer is kind of the captain of the ship. He sort of liaisons more closely with the band about song choices, arrangements, writing of the songs. And some producers actually help and co-write on some of the projects. But he's the overseer and the captain of the ship. The engineer is sort of the technician that runs all the gear, sets the microphone, creates the sounds, and he does all the work. And then the mixer is the final stage once everything's all recorded on multi-tracks. You got your bass, drums, guitars, vocals are all on separate tracks.
Yep.
A mixer goes and blends that all into the final product that you hear, and that's kind of it in a nutshell.
If that's the case, can you please remix "Fly on the Wall" for us?
Sure.
I'm begging you, man. I actually like that album, but it needs a serious remix.
I've heard that a lot, and other than when I listened to it when I came out in the day, I can't ever think that I've listened to that in quite a while, so I'll have to go back and check it out.
Okay. And I wanted to also bring up mastering. I actually worked with Bob Ludwig once on an advertising project, who, as you know, is a famous mastering guy.
Yeah.
And in his studio, I saw For Those About to Rock LP framed on his wall, and I'm like, why do you have that? And he said, well, I mastered that album. And I said,
Right.
You're kidding me. What does mastering mean? And he he gave the coolest explanation. He said, let's say you shoot a roll of film. Are you going to bring it to Walmart at the 1 hour photo mat, or are you going to send it away to a professional lab and get all those deep, rich colors out of it? And
That's
then
perfect.
I got it. Yeah, I thought,
That's
wow.
perfect. Yeah.
Is it so you agree with that?
Oh yeah. They kind of put the final sheen on things, and for me, I think the biggest thing they do is because me and the band, the producer, work hard to get the sound and everything we want. But when you're mixing like 10 or 11 songs, it takes about a day a song to mix, sometimes a little more.
Yeah.
Sometimes the songs when they put together on a whole record won't match level wise, or one song might be a little more brighter EQ on, and one's a little fatter. So a mastered engineer smooths that all out, so it's a continuous kind of sound and level.
So it's like a final color correction for a movie, even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, let's go back to your roots. Were you born in Canada?
Yeah, born and raised here in the Lower Mainland. I actually live about an hour outside of Vancouver, a place called Langley, which used to be all farmland. And,
Okay.
The last 50, 60 years, it's all kind of been developed. And but I grew up on a farm
Okay.
out here, and I've kind of never moved away.
You grew up with this love for music. You even had your own garage band, you said at one point, but you knew you were never going to be the next Jimmy Page.
No.
Although maybe you could produce Jimmy Page one day.
Yeah, bizarre, wasn't it?
Uh,
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, I knew pretty quick I wasn't going to make any money playing guitar because I could just barely sort of hold a chord. So
Yeah.
when I had the opportunity to jump into a studio, I jumped for it.
And you decided to drop out of school at age 15 or so?
Yeah, it was around 15 or something, and I drove heavy equipment and logging trucks with my dad. He had a kind of a small logging outfit, um, excavating kind of outfit. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I got bored of being laid off in the winter because it was either too muddy or too snowy or something to work.
Right.
So I thought, what do I want to do with my life? And I thought, well, I like music, so called up a few studios in town, and one of them needed a janitor. They didn't have any positions, but a janitor. So I thought I'll jump at that and get my foot in the door.
That's amazing. And was that a big deal for you to drop out of school for your family?
No, not really. I mean, my mom was probably disappointed, but school wasn't for me. Like I was just getting A's and B's, but I just didn't get on with my teachers. So I'd
Yeah.
skip classes and then I'd fail because I was skipping classes, and I just thought, this is bullshit. So
I remember my
failed.
kids at that age, they're hemming and hawing about school and I'm as a parent, you're like, come on, stay the course. This is what you do. And then one of my kids said, yeah, but dad, no one from AC/DC graduated high school and they're your heroes. It was like, oh, shut me right down, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, we've got 4 kids, and that discussion popped up quite a lot. Well, Dad didn't finish school. Dad quit school. I was like, yeah, but don't do what Dad did.
Right. So you're at this place called Little Mountain Studios working as a custodial supervisor, and
That's
you're
right.
cleaning toilets by day, but then you're learning engineering at night. You must have like literally been sleeping there.
Well, I was, because I'd start my janitor stuff at 5 a.m. And then at that time, Little Mountain was primary. They did jingles and commercials and stuff. The owners had a jingle company.
Okay.
So I would help out with the engineer on that, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 or 6 at night, and then the doors would shut and lock up. So at that time too, Bob Rock was an assistant and an up and coming engineer. So at night he'd go and the Vancouver punk bands to come in
Cool.
and record because they could get cheap or free time. So I said to Bob, I need a hand at night. He says, sure, if you want to hang out. So
Wow.
so we'd work till 1, 2 in the morning. So I had to be back at work at 5. I got an hour drive out to home. So I thought, I just had a sleeping bag, and I slept in the loading bay at the studio for about a year and a half.
Wow. Lesson learned, kids at home, that if you really want something bad enough, you'll find a way, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the first time you heard AC/DC must have been around this time. Do you remember that moment?
I was in my teens when I first heard them, and we had gone to see Aerosmith concert. And there's this opening band called AC/DC, and we didn't, have any clue what they were.
Right.
And at that time, AC/DC meant you sort of hit either way, And so we're kind of like, I don't know if we want to go see these guys, but we ended up going to see them, and we're just blown away. So, this Aerosmith show's going to be awesome. And they came out, and they're right at their sort of darkest days. They were just drugged right out, drunk out. You could hardly recognize the songs. And I think we left the concert early, actually, but
Ouch.
I went straight to a record store and bought up everything I could find with AC/DC on it.
That's awesome.
And then many years later, I didn't really realize it, but many years later, I thought, I wonder what show I saw. And it was the Highway to Hell tour
Okay, so you saw Bon.
Yeah, but I didn't know it and didn't appreciate it. Well, I guess I appreciated it, but I just remember Mal and Ang. I just remember the guitar playing on that was just like, what?
Yeah.
So bang on.
So when you went to buy those AC/DC albums after the show, what was your reaction to the production of those 70 albums?
I loved the rawness of it.
Yeah.
It was just, the sounds are kind of in your face, and it was raw, and just, it was just the perfect type of music for the stage I was at in my life. It was just
Yep.
no balls, rock and roll, and then at that time you'd start getting so the beginning of the 80s, bands started wearing makeup and hair, and you got your Kiss and all that.
Right.
And I just really didn't get that. I liked a band that could go up there with jeans and t-shirt, kick your ass,
Right.
So that was sort of where I gravitated to.
So eventually you get your shot, and the first few bands that you ever work with are all from your homeland, including Rush and Loverboy and Bryan Adams. And I was hoping April Wine would be in there somewhere. I love those guys. Do you remember those guys?
Oh, yeah. That was
Tucked
one
in
of my
there somewhere.
favorite bands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
no.
those guys. I always thought, and I wanted to ask you this, I always thought Bryan Adams' Run to You, which is off that same Reckless album that you worked on, sounded a lot like Walk All Over You by AC/DC. Did you ever put that together?
Ah, okay. I didn't really get that. Now, Run to You, there's a funny story. Brian wrote that for Blue Oyster Cult, and they
Oh.
didn't want it. So he says, I'll put it on my record. So if you listen to that in mind, it's got a little bit of Don't Fear the Reaper kind of vibe to it.
No kidding. Yeah, I
Yeah,
always assumed that Bryan Adams had heard Walk All Over You and said, "That's a pretty awesome riff. I'm gonna make it a little bit more poppy." And
right.
I love both
Huh.
songs, but you listen to the chords, so I just wanted to know if there was a direct lift there or not.
Yeah, no, I'll have to re-listen to that.
Okay.
That
But
never
the
occurred to me. So,
the first artist on your resume back in 1980 was a band called Prism. Tell us why that band has an interesting connection in your timeline through Bruce Fairbairn.
well, Prism was a Vancouver band that Bruce was a part of. He was a trumpet player, and in their early incarnations had a horn section. So they decided to do away with that and sort of go more kind of a rock vein. So Bruce was kind of out of a job, so he says, I'll produce these guys." So for their second record, they came into Little Mountain Sound to work with Bob Rock, and it was one of the first records Bob Rock engineered, and one of the first ones Bruce had produced. And I assisted on that one. It was called Armageddon, but I was also still doing my janitor stuff, so I wasn't really a full assistant, so I never got a credit on that.
Oh man.
But it was the first time Bob, Bruce, and I worked together. So the next Prism record was Young and Restless, and all three of us worked on that together. And
Cool.
from that, we jumped into Loverboy, and from Loverboy, Bruce got the Bon Jovi gig, and then Aerosmith, and then it just all kind of started snowballing. But Bob Rock, Bruce Fairbairn, and I were a team for many years. We did a lot of records together.
It's a great team. And so you've got these
Yeah.
great Canadian artists in your arsenal now. And then the big one hits your desk, Aerosmith Permanent Vacation, a Boston-based band who, for the first time in their history, are sober in the studio, right?
Yeah, we started doing that one as the team. Bruce was producing, Bob was engineering, and I was assisting. And I remember the first night we had to load in and kind of set it all up on a Saturday night. Bob and I were kind of bummed to work on a Saturday night, and then I just remember Stephen and Joe walking in and walking by the control room, and you see them through the glass with their full floor duster coats on, and he said, "Well, if you're going to work a Saturday night, this is the band to be working on."
That's awesome.
Yeah. So then Bob was in a band at that time called the Paolas. They had, I think, a couple of songs that did okay down the States. Anyways, we were, I think, the first or second week into a 6-week recording. And Bob said to Bruce, we just got booked on a Canada-wide tour for 4 weeks. He says, I won't be able to finish the record. So Bruce says, okay, well, that's unfortunate, but no problem. We'll have Mike finish recording it, and then we'll look for somebody to mix it. So that's what we did. We finished all the recording of it, and as we're just about done, Bruce had to go out of town for 3 days or so, and so he says, well, while I'm gone, can you just do a real quick rough mix of all the songs, and then we'll send that out to potential mixers. I said, okay, sure. So I go in the next day, and I'm mixing away on the first song, and Stephen and Joe come in, and they had a listen, and they said, oh, you don't want to do this, do you? And I was like, I know. And then Steven says, no. I says, you don't want to do this. He says, you want to mix it. He says, go for it. So I did. So when Bruce got back, we had 3 songs mixed, and he was a little choked that I didn't do rough mixes of all of them. But Stephen and Joe said, oh, well, check it out. So Bruce listened to the song. I think we found our mixer. So
that's awesome.
That
they had your back.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was great.
Wow. So you were tasked to finding a mixer, and that mixer was you.
Yeah. So basically, in one project, I went from being the assistant to the mixer on the project. So that was a giant door opener.
And I also noticed that you were credited with playing a Plunger Mute on that.
Yes.
Album. What is that?
Well, it's basically lip smacks.
Okay.
So they end up sounding like hand claps. But, when we're doing all the Aerosmith records, Stephen particularly was really into more organic, percussion stuff. He's an amazing tambourine and shaker player because he used to be a drummer. But, anything we could do organically, he was into. So, we were going, oh, let's put hand claps on this. And you do that, and it just sounded a little bit too straight or something, So he's I got an idea. So he's doing it, and then I was just goofing around and standing out there with him going, kind of like that, and he goes, oh, yeah, here, put on a set of headphones. You could do them with me. So I guess
That's
I'm a guppy plunger now.
Wow. So you're working with Bob Rock, Bruce Fairbairn. You're starting to take US by storm in a place called Vancouver with half the equipment of places like New York and LA probably, but more determination, which is awesome. So had you ever reached out or tried to reach out to AC/DC at that time?
No, I hadn't. I was happy in my position of, starting my engineering career, transitioning from assistant to engineering. And, at that point, I'm still, sort of that country boy working in the big city of Vancouver, which actually is quite a small city compared to the world,
Right.
And never thought outside of that. It was like whatever bands came into town to record. Oh, great. Oh, we're working on these guys today, So they approached Bruce.
Okay.
And they had recorded their record in Ireland with their brother George Young. And they just about finished recording, and something popped up. Illness in the family, or George got ill, I'm not sure what, but he couldn't finish the record, so they had to do the vocals and lead guitars. So I guess they reached out to Bruce because of Bruce's success with Bon Jovi and Loverboy and Aerosmith. But they reached out to Bruce, said, hey, we just need to finish these vocals, throw some guitars down and mix it. He goes, okay, sure, he'll do it. So they rolled in, and one of the first songs we did, putting a vocal on with Brian. And it was in the wrong key for him. It wasn't just in his powerhouse thing. So they had to re-record the guitar and bass to change the key of the song so he could, sing it in his range. And I guess Mal and Ang liked the sound of those so much better. We re-recorded everything else.
So you redid the entire Razor's Edge.
Yeah, except for drums. Drums were done. But we did the bass and guitars again, and they were just a lot happier with the sounds. So
had Chris Slade laid down those drums already, or were they?
Yeah.
Were there? Okay.
Yeah, it was Chris. And then towards the end of the record, they decided they want to do a couple more songs. So I know we did Mistress to Christmas, and so long ago. So we recorded 2 songs there, and that was with Chris.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Wow. So I had heard a story. This is 1989 or so, somewhere around there, 1990. And Stuart Young shows up in Vancouver to meet you and Bruce, and it took a moment for you to realize that this wasn't Stuart Young's song he had brought with him, but it was Malcolm Young.
Yeah, I went to answer the door. The doorbell rang. It was on a weekend, so after hours. So I went up front to answer the door, and there was Stuart. Stuart was quite a big guy. I'd guess, 6'4" or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And I thought it was the son there. And it was, I'm here to see Bruce. So I ushered them into the back, and then they started talking, and then I realized, oh, not his son, that's Malcolm. And I never realized, their stature before until you see him in person. And then, so I went back and looked at album covers and stuff. I'm like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
The guitars look so big on them. Of course, but you didn't really realize that, the sound is so big.
Yes.
Think of them as being small guys.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Angus is 5'2", something like that.
Yeah.
And the boys really enjoyed working with you guys then.
Yeah. I guess we made a good impression. Like, the thing with those guys is they're really kind of blue collar guys.
Yeah.
They're just really normal, down to earth guys, and they like to be surrounded like a family. So even some of their road crew they've had forever, and I guess that's why I've stuck it out so long. That we're kind of like family. Like even the last bunch of records we did, Angus's wife Ella would cook dinner for us. So 6 o'clock, okay, boys, dinner's ready, and okay, put everything down and run into the kitchen to eat. And
that's really nice.
So,
that's really nice.
Yeah, cool.
There was a quote Bruce had said years ago. I don't remember it directly, but it was something like he wanted AC/DC to sound like they were 18 years old again.
Right.
And that was his goal, to get those chants from Dirty Deeds, that whole vibe going of when he remembered listening to AC/DC for the first time. So, and to me, that album was probably, and still is, the most commercially polished AC/DC album. Would you agree?
I guess in hindsight, I remember when we did Razor's Edge and in particular Thunderstruck. Thunderstruck wasn't really one of my favorite songs on there. I felt it took too long to get fired up. It just seemed to be this long build.
I agree.
But in hindsight now, after years of listening to it, and it's become quite an anthem for them, I really like the song.
I agree. When I first heard that, I was like, man, this intro's going on forever. And then eventually it becomes like this incredible anthem that will remain in their live show forever. Yeah,
because it took a long time to get, you've been thunderstruck. It took a while to get there.
You told this great story that I'd heard. I was wondering if you could delve back into it. Somebody said, maybe it was Bruce, we need an intro for Thunderstruck. And Angus said, well, I do this little finger tapping exercise. And you said, okay, let's roll the tape. And then what happened?
Yeah, well, like you said, we needed an intro. And Angus says, I've got something I've been working on. He says, let me go. So we rolled the tape. Angus sat in his stool and lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, and started his little spiely thing there. And so it goes through the intro and into the first verse, and Bruce and I kind of look at each other, and Bruce sort of motions me, keep rolling the tape. So went all the way through the verse, all the way through the chorus, all the way through the whole song. He just played it right to the very end. And then so we stopped tape, and Angus said to Bruce, "Wow, how's that?" And he had this ash. His whole cigarette was one long ash hanging out of his mouth. And we said, oh, it was great. It was awesome. Like, he just played it, first take. So we said, okay, let's try another, see if we beat that. But it never even got close to beating it. That was the take. So when you listen to the song now, it's through the whole song. But in the mix, we just kind of duck it in and out. But it was one take, first time. It was awesome.
No loops.
No loops, nothing. No punch-ins, no fix-ups. That's just exactly how he played it.
Pure magic. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, jumping from Razor's Edge, I remember when I first heard AC/DC's one-off single, Big Gun, produced by Rick Rubin. I was pretty excited because I thought to myself, he did it. He's a fan of the band, and he knew how to capture everything I love about these guys, the
Yeah.
sound, the energy, the hook, the tempo. Very cool song. And then AC/DC hired Rick to produce their next full-length LP, Ballbreaker. And when I
Yep.
first heard Ballbreaker, I felt like I was in the room with AC/DC. It sounded, it had this dry, tight sound, but it sounded really good. Kudos to you for that. But it's no secret that his producing style did not go over so well with AC/DC, particularly Mal. I wanted to lay down a theory here for you, see what you think about it. Let me rewind here. So while Rick and the band were waiting for you, you were finishing up Van Halen album out in LA, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I
And they
can't
were
remember.
working on getting a drum sound in New York. And now here's the return of this human metronome by the name of Phil Rudd. He had been out of the band. He's finally back. And they're working in New York. And there's a lot of pressure to get the drum sound right. And they're just not finding it, right?
Yeah.
So then after 6 weeks, you guys decide to go to LA.
Yeah.
But to make matters worse, Rick isn't showing up very much at the studio. And he's kind of on his own schedule. And once you finally get there, the band's in the studio all day and they're waiting for Rick. And you're suggesting, why don't we just lay down some takes, right? And the band says, well, we'll wait for Rick, right?
Right.
And am I getting this right so far?
Yeah. Yeah. It's mostly right. So they're in New York trying to get the sound. Rick and the band all wanted this really dry in your face sound, and whoever had picked the studio was the wrong studio. It was a place called the Power Station, which is a great studio, but its room is known for its ambience, its big sound. So we spent 6 weeks there trying to get the sound right. We had burlap sacks covered every spot in the room, which was like a big kind of a dome-shaped room, so almost like a round ceiling and wood everywhere. And we spent weeks trying to, treat it so it wasn't so live. And finally, we just kind of gave up. We said, okay, we gotta go to LA. And by that time, Rick wasn't coming in until later that night. We'd show up at 11 in the morning, and Rick would kind of roll in about 8 or 9 at night. And we just sat around all day, kind of. So that's when I said to the band, hey, look, let's just, throw some tracks down and, Rick can check it out when he gets in. And I said, no, we've got a producer. We're paying him to be here. So we're not playing until he's here, just in case there's some magic or some quick direction, and then we can nail it or whatever. They didn't want to waste time. So, it was 6 weeks in New York for nothing. And then we came to LA and got her done. But that was a tough record to make, just because these guys, when they come in, like, they don't even rehearse the songs. They like it always fresh.
Right.
So having already sort of done the record once, moved cities, and now we had to do it again, it was really hard to keep the vibe up and the energy going. It was kind of like.
I was gonna say that this is insane to me, because here's a guy who gets the gig of a lifetime. He's making a record with his heroes. He's making them sit around all day. And I know this is kind of his MO, and he gets great stuff out of people. But do you think Rick was intimidated with anxiety about the pressure of pulling off a successful AC/DC record with his heroes?
I'm not sure that was even the case. Rick was a really nice guy, and when he was there, everything was fine. The vibes were fine. It's just he was rarely there. And I mean, I believe that's why we had picked New York to do the record, because Rick lived in LA and they wanted him sort of away from any distractions. But what happened? Why? I was surprised because Rick had a lot of records he was trying to make sound like AC/DC. So when I heard that Rick was producing, I thought, oh, this is going to be the perfect match. This is going to be great.
Right.
And I
heard he actually asked the band to leave the control room once because he had to meditate.
Well, yeah, in New York, when he'd show up at like 6 or 7, he'd order food. When that arrived, he'd take it into the control room to eat it, and then he had to meditate for like an hour and a half. We just still sitting there like all day, and then now we got to wait. Rick's locked in the control room.
And Malcolm was right beside him, folded, crossed arms.
Yeah.
God. Well, the good news is that AC/DC credited you with not only sound engineer and mixer, but also co-producer, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. You at least earned that after dealing with all that.
Well, it was the little extra work I had to put in there to keep things
Oh my
rolling and
God.
everybody sane. They said, we'll give you that credit. So the band don't really need a producer. They just want somebody they can bounce stuff off
Sure.
and keep on point,
I saw Rick at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when AC/DC was inducted, and he looked pretty happy to be a part of their history. But and I don't mean to talk smack about Rick because I'm a pretty big fan of his production work. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but describe meeting Phil for the first time, rejoining the band after being away for so long.
It's definitely a thrill to meet Phil because, he is the heartbeat of the band, Chris is an amazing drummer, but when you listen to the AC/DC records that Phil's on, you can't deny that it gels into a different thing when he's smacking it down. And Phil's he just smacks his drums too. Like he's actually pretty hard to get a good sound on because he hits everything so hard, like he wears the skins out really fast.
That's
Sometimes
amazing.
you've got to change the snare halfway through the song and but I guess it makes you work harder. It's like kind of recording a Brahma bull, if you will. You're just kind of hanging on until you got the song down, but it makes you work harder. And I guess, the sounds end up being better. You don't get relaxed on it.
Right.
You're always on your toes. So, and, he's a sweetheart of a guy, really kind of unassuming. And,
Right.
like Angus, he's always got a cigarette in his mouth when he's playing. And I don't know how he can do that, like with a drummer. And, you got to breathe pretty heavy. It's like, I don't know how he can have a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. But
And he does that
man.
live too. It's crazy.
Yeah, I know. He's got his tech there lighting smokes for him, passing him smoke as he's playing.
Do you have a favorite memory from a song off that album?
Not really, because like I said, that was a hard record to make.
Yeah.
And it was all good and fine, but I don't really have I guess the favorite memory was when we finally had it mixed and done, and we're like, yeah, we're done.
I was kind of a big fan of Boogeyman just because it was so different for them. It almost felt like Johnny Lee Hooker or something. It was really cool.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So we mentioned you traveling to New York and LA, and so although you're based in Canada, you're basically a nomad, right? You have to travel wherever.
Yeah, well, for sure. Through a lot of the 90s and into the 2000s, I think I was on the road 9 months and home 3.
Oh, that's
So
rough.
yeah, a lot of traveling. But all at once, you'd go away for 6 weeks and home for a week, and then away for 3 weeks and home for 2 weeks. Spread out, but still, got pretty tired of hotel rooms.
Yeah, I hear you. Tell us a quick history of Bryan Adams' warehouse studio in Vancouver. AC/DC record there more than anywhere ever in their history, right?
Well, when Little Mountain kind of got sold and it sort of went under, I think it was around 92, sort of the vibe of the studio and it, was everybody that worked there. And so that kind of dissipated. And Brian had his own setup in his house in North Vancouver, in the basement of his house. But, it was always a pain sometimes when outside bands would want to come and use it because, now you got a band living downstairs in your house, So
Right.
he moved it to a little warehouse in North Vancouver, this industrial area. And that was okay. But again, we couldn't do loud music during the day because of the other tenants, beside him and stuff. So we could only record at night. So Brian is a huge supporter of, the historic stuff in Vancouver. So he had bought this old building, which is one of the oldest buildings in Vancouver. I think it's one out of 4 or 5 that survived a big fire there in the late 1800s. So he had bought this building and was just kind of sitting on it. So he decided, hey, I'm going to convert this into a studio. So that's what he did. He spent, millions on it because it's an old brick building. And, we're in an earthquake zone here. So it had to be retrofitted for earthquake stuff. So he spent, I think, $2 million on stuff you don't even see, but just to make it
That's
safe
painful.
for an earthquake. And then he finished and put in, there's a tracking room, a mix room, and then another little thing. So basically 3 studios in there. So he spent a lot of money on it. And that sort of became the next or the newest Little Mountain sound kind of thing. And all the big rock bands would go there.
So is that where your favorite board to work on is? That
Well, I've got another studio here that Bruce Fairbairn had bought called the Armory Studios, and that's got the exact same mixing board I use over at the warehouse. It's an SSL
nice
4K, and so I work at I jump back and forth between the two of them.
Okay.
The Armory's got a really nice tracking room as well, which sounds great. The warehouse tracking room is a little bigger.
Right.
So it's just down to sort of preferences. The warehouse is right in a place called Gastown, which is the old end of town. So it's kind of cool when the band's there working and it's not their turn to be recording. They can wander around all the tourist shops and stuff.
That's great.
Whereas the Armory is a little bit outside the city. It's a 5-10 minute cab ride, but there's not a lot to do around the Armory, so you're kind of hanging out at the studio, which isn't really a problem, but it's just preference,
Yeah, I heard, I guess it's a good segue into the next LP for AC/DC, Stiff Upper Lip. When you got to work with George Young for the first time, he had actually fell in love with Vancouver and wanted to move there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he just loved his whole stay there. I believe his wife was out as well, and they hung out, and they were, I think he actually, even on days off or in between, they'd be out running around, looking at properties and houses and stuff. And then they had gone back to, and I don't think he was living in Australia at the time. I think it was somewhere in Europe, maybe he was living, and with all intentions of coming back out this way, but just never happened.
So for Stiff Upper Lip, the boys wanted to go back to Bruce Fairbairn, but sadly he passed away prematurely at the age of 49, 50 years old.
Yeah.
And they lured brother George back into the studio out of retirement. You must have been bittersweet for you, sad about Bruce, but wow, this is one of the producers you grew up listening to.
Yeah. Well, on that record too, it was their first time coming back to Vancouver to record. So also, Bruce had just died and Little Mountain was gone too. So Malcolm and Angus and George all flew into Vancouver to come and look at the warehouse and just make sure they're going to be able to get the sounds they were looking for in the new studio. So as it would have it, the day they flew in was Bruce's funeral. So they all came to Mal and Ang came to the funeral with me. And then we went straight to the studio and just recorded a couple little things. George played drums just to throw up a couple mics just to see if, it was going to work out or not. And they loved it.
Did Angus and Mal wear jeans and T-shirts to the funeral?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, no, actually, you know what? They both had brought their, I guess maybe when they travel, they wear their blazer, their suit jacket.
They had a blazer with them?
Over the jeans and T-shirts. But
Oh, that's cool. So the 3 brothers are jamming in front of you. How amazing.
Yeah. What a thrill to meet George, too.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about George.
I've become a fan of all the early records, and I had even gone and checked out some of the Easy Beat stuff, and some of that stuff was great, So it was really a thrill to meet him, and again, he's such a sweetheart, such a nice man.
What did you learn from George?
Well, George's big thing with these guys was fairly hands-off. He would definitely jump in with his opinions. They would ask him his opinion a lot when we'd finish a take, because they're kind of going for something a little different on that record. They want it to be a little bit more bluesy and not as hard rock,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they were kind of going for. So I guess, they wanted George's input of, does that sound okay? Is that too this? Or as any brothers, Mal and Ang would occasionally have differences. And sometimes he'd have to sort of leave the room. It got very heated. So George was great at when the differences went on for a little while, they'd be in the room for an hour yelling at each other or whatever. And
Wow.
George would be the big brother and walk in and, okay, you guys, that's enough. Off to
That's
your rooms.
awesome. Wow,
So,
you get to see the family fighting.
the family feud. But it was always over probably nothing, and it always got resolved, and there was never any, lingering bad vibes or feeling like they just had to get something off their chest at each other, and sometimes it came out as yelling, so
Right.
it's not a big deal.
Did George use his tried and true AC/DC song test by playing everything on the piano first?
You know what? There's a couple of ones I remember them working out, probably key, different keys or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, a little bit, but not usually. They had it pretty. They kind of knew what they were doing when they showed up at the studio. So
Yeah.
there wasn't like a lot of writing or changing things in the studio. It's just capturing the right vibe.
Well, I know Harry Vanda. I'm not sure I know that story because they were partners forever.
Yeah. I don't know much about Harry other than they had worked on all the early stuff.
Yeah.
I believe didn't Harry have something to do with the Easy Beats as well? Or
Yeah, they were both in
he
the
was
band
first.
together, and then they both
Yeah.
produced every AC/DC album up until, the latter days. So I just didn't know why it was just George, if you knew the story behind that or no.
Yeah, I don't know. When George retired, maybe Harry did, and then the brothers convinced him to pull out of retirement, and I know that took a bit of convincing. He really
Yep.
didn't want to.
Yeah.
But I guess he thought, it's my kid brothers. And,
Yeah. I gotta get in between Angus and Mal so they don't beat each other up.
Right, yeah.
So Brian said it was the most fun he's ever had in the studio. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, it was a fun record. Again, probably because it was a little different than their norm. But
Yeah.
even when they do it different, it's not too far off where it's like, whoa, that doesn't even sound like AC/DC. It's still definitely an AC/DC record. It's just a little different from where they had always sort of been,
Yeah.
So that kind of made it a little funner, it's a little
Yeah.
different, and hey, something a little different. Brian was singing really good on that record, so that's why he had fun.
Right. I think
Yeah.
Hold Me Back is one of my favorites off of that. So does each member fly in their own gear to the studio? Amps and heads and instruments and all that stuff?
Well, all their gear, they've got, probably a couple of big warehouses around the world.
Okay.
So all their gear stays there. Imagine all their live stuff, props and PAs and all that kind of stuff are in another room. But I know they've got big things. So they all throw it into a shipping container and freight it over on a boat, and then the trucks pick it up at the harbor and bring it into the studio. So the bands would walk in with their personal guitars and bass, and I guess fill with a bag of drumsticks or something. So they don't cart their own gear around, but just their personal stuff they'll bring in.
Now, I always love about your work is that there's not a lot of effects or overdubs, and there's like minimal doubling. It just sounds really what you want it to sound like. And I have this vision of you using like only 6 or 10 tracks per song, which I know cannot be true. But what's an average amount of tracks you use per song for AC/DC?
Well, when I'm recording, and especially with AC/DC, because like we don't double guitars or any of that stuff. So with AC/DC, it's less than 48 tracks for sure.
Okay.
Which for rock is a lot because when I first started the studio, it was a 16-track analog, and then we got in a 24-track analog, and then towards somewhere in the 80s, the technology allowed you to lock together, synchronize 2 24 tracks. So you had 48 tracks, but really you only had 46 because you had to designate a track on each of the machine for this thing called SMPTE, which is a sync code that this machine would read and synchronize the tapes together. So, you just did all your stuff on 40 tracks if you could, and that's sort of how we grew up. So now that you got Pro Tools and you can have virtually as many tracks as your computer can handle, hundreds.
Wow.
I still kind of keep it to the 40, 48 kind of tracks if I can. It just makes it easier at the end too.
Right. And they're all wearing headphones, and is it all live, or do they have to separate out?
No, it's all live. Every record I've done with them has been live. There's been some records, like the ones at the warehouse. They all wear headphones, and they've each got their own little headphone mixing station. So they'll have, I think there's 16 channels we can send them. So they'll have separate levels on each instrument that they can sort of set up their own mix, and then that doesn't get touched, So they get the same thing every time. When we worked in LA, because there was an older board and you couldn't get sort of separate headphone sends, we put them all in a back drum booth, and we put up a stack of NS10 speakers. So I think there's 4 aside. Nice. And then we put the submix out through that, so they didn't have to wear headphones. It was like they were just playing in a band, and we had to seal that all off because the drums was in the big live room, so we had to keep all that from leaking into the drums and that. But we call it the sweat box because they'd go in there for half an hour with the doors closed, and we'd have to turn the AC off because the AC, when it gets going too much, makes the guitars cold, which makes the strings stretch, and then they go out of tune. It's really hard to keep a guitar in tune, when it's in the AC. So yeah, they would just be dripping with sweat. And we'd finally finish the take, and we'd open the doors, and then all the smoke would come out because they'd be in there smoking and
oh god,
sweating. And so that was kind of fun, but that's one way of doing it. It's just hard to do it that way and keep separation, But
right.
Like when a band's playing live, and that's what AC/DC does best.
Right.
That's how they're used to hearing things. In headphones sometimes. You can't, especially with bass and sort of low end stuff, the headphones don't reproduce that as well as you would hear acoustically, So,
right.
It's always hard to get the vibe going through headphones.
And do you mix the same way every time? Like you lay down Phil or Chris's stuff, and then you put on, let's say, Brian next, and then the guitars next, or do you mix it up?
I guess I have a routine. I do it on with everything, whether I've recorded or not, and especially if I haven't recorded, I don't know the song, I'll just sort of push all the faders up the board and get like a really rough blend and kind of let the song play through a few times and just sort of figure out where the song wants to go, and then I'll turn things off, get the drums punching the way I want and start adding bass and guitars. I usually add the vocals in last on rock stuff, And sometimes me and my assistants always laugh. It's like you get it down, the whole song, it's just sounding great, and then you turn the vocal on, and then it's like, oh, now I got to tuck the guitars back and make room for the vocal. Now the drums have got to come back. So it's almost like, oh, that vocal ruined the song again.
Poor Brian.
Yeah, but funny enough, like if you're doing country stuff, I do it kind of the other way around, sort of quickly get the drums and that up there. Then I work on the vocals, and then I wrap the band around that because it's just a different vibe,
Speaking of country, we had talked with Big and Rich. They're always looking. They were looking for that AC/DC sound with their records. Did they come to you specifically for that?
I can't remember actually. I was in Nashville doing something at the time, and as so much happened in a lot of those music towns, in LA and Nashville especially, when you're in town, you bump into somebody in the hallway or at a restaurant. They say, oh, hey, can I get you to mix that tomorrow? Or whatever. So that, I think it's kind of how it happened. I think my management had possibly reached out to them too, but I don't think they came to me directly at first. But.
Okay. So there was this long gap between albums with Black Ice, and rightfully so. AC/DC had been at it for years. They're enjoying playing some live shows with the Stones, and they get inducted into the Hall of Fame, taking some time with their families probably. But once they head back into the studio with you, you start to notice something different about Mal. Can you describe that to us?
Mal is the solid rock of the band. He's the his rhythm playing is second to none. He sets the tempos and all that. And, though him and Angus are both sort of equal partners, I guess because Mal was older, Ang would kind of always look to Mal's opinion, and sort of Mal was kind of the director, So when we started that record, Mal was there, but we'd be doing takes, and all of a sudden, something happened. Mal said, "Oh shoot, sorry, I forgot that we go to the chorus there. Okay, let's do it again." And that used to happen a little bit more frequently during the course of the records. We're like, something's not right here.
Right.
That was kind of the first initial warnings of it. And then by the time we're finished the record, Brian was quite concerned. So I know when they went home, Brian had him fly out to Florida to some brain specialist or something.
Really?
In the States there, and had him looked at. And then then once I'm done with the band, I don't I kind of stay in touch with them, but I didn't hear anything more of what came of it and where he ended up and all that. I just know they said he had Alzheimer's and the beginning stages of, and then when I met up with them when they played Vancouver, when they were touring that record, Mal comes up to me and goes, "Oh, Mike," he says, "Oh yeah, no," he says, "I'm doing way better." He says, they got me on some pills that's totally helping this problem I've been having, and he says, "I'm back." So that's what I knew until I guess it degenerates fairly fast. So
yeah, what a gamer though. He just kept going and going and going until he couldn't.
Yep.
So,
and that's where Angus has picked up the torch. And
did you ever get emotional in the studio working on AC/DC?
Well, I usually always get emotional when I'm mixing. I just get so wrapped up in the song. Sometimes sometimes I'll well up when I'm doing moves or something, just because it's just, I don't know, I just get into it.
Yep.
So Rock or Bust had a few moments, just we were all really missing Mal,
Right.
It's a big hole. And their cousin or nephew or whatever, Stevie Young, came in and filled in, but he had pretty big shoes to fill, and he did a fantastic job. But there's just no replacing Mal.
Yeah, must have been a very emotional recording. You've got, like you mentioned, Mal's gone, Brian's hearing is going, Cliff's getting battle worn, and Phil's just not showing up in the studio, is he?
Well, it took a while to get Phil to even come into Vancouver, and we weren't even sure what was going to happen. Everybody showed up, and I think we had to wait a week or something before Phil showed up. And I don't know if it was a contract dispute or what was going on. That's all behind the scenes from me. But finally got him there and got his parts done. But you could tell that Phil was battling his demons.
Yeah, it wasn't the same Phil when he showed up, was it?
No. Played great, but
of
he
course
just wasn't the same guy. Yeah, this wasn't the same guy at all.
And usually Malcolm and Cliff do the backing vocals. So who took over from Mal? Was it Angus?
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah, because maybe it's their stature or something, but they've got distinctive voices. It's kind of got a thing to it.
Right.
In all their background vocals, you can hear that. So that's part of their sound. Like, you just can't hire. And Brendan sings quite well. So sometimes he'd pop in there with Cliff's a good singer. So he'd pop in there, but you needed that gravelly, rough voice to do it. And, we never had Brian singing backgrounds because he's got such a distinctive voice and so loud that it would just sound like Brian doubling himself. So it doesn't work.
And was Stevie using Mal's equipment?
Yeah. Mal's amp and guitar.
Yeah. Wow. By the way, and I don't want to keep you too long, for the fans out there listening, I also wanted to give accolades to you, Mike, for not just these 5 consecutive AC/DC albums, but listen to this. You have assisted and worked on AC/DC Live, No Bull, Plug Me In, Step Up for Lip DVD, the Rock Band video game, Backtracks, Private Parts soundtrack, Iron Man 2 soundtrack, Live at River Plate, and remastering the entire AC/DC iTunes catalog. So essentially, if AC/DC is involved, Mike Fraser's name is on it.
Yeah, I know. It's funny, like you look in all credits, sometimes, I'm credited with engineering, some of their older stuff or Highway to Hell. I'm like, no, I didn't. But I guess that's the credit off of the remastering or something.
Right. Hey, you'll take it, right?
Yeah.
So Rock or Bust goes live, and as they hit the road, the wheels kind of do come off a little bit, especially for Brian. And he's expressing concerns in the studio. Was he expressing them to you?
None of them were getting any younger. And I know on a bunch of the records, just because the way Brian sings, and then especially when he's live, I don't know how many miles he runs a night on those big stages,
Right.
and screaming at the top of his range and all that for 3 hours. It just takes a physical toll on you. Your lungs, your stomach, your throat, your head. So the last bunch of records, Brian would always come in, eager to get the record done, but he says, I hate when the records are done. He says, because that means we've got to hit the road again. So
yeah,
he loved being on the road and singing to the fans and all that, but it was just such a long toll to take that, every record he says, oh, this is my last one. I'm not doing any more after this. And then, the next record, oh, hey, Brian.
yeah.
So I think that was just something that was coming.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure what the vibe was like out on the road, but I'm sure it wasn't as up and happy as when Mal was there,
Sure.
So I think that was part of it. And I think, with his ear infection or whatever was happening, when the doctor said, look, if you keep doing this, you're going to completely lose your hearing. That was enough for Brian.
Sure.
Says, okay, I'm done.
What's the proudest you've been on an AC/DC song?
Well, I guess, really, in hindsight, it's Thunderstruck, just because it's, it's one of their anthem songs now. So,
right.
It's right up with Highway to Hell and Back in Black and Shook Me. And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. My buddy Greg and I went to the last show ever at this point in Philly with Axl in place of Brian. And that was actually my 25th show of seeing AC/DC live. And I'm not bragging because I know there are some fans that see them 25 times on one tour. But I was actually at the Wrigley Field show, and I saw a camera crews going on. So I was wondering if you had that project cross your desk yet.
Not going to comment on that one, actually.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. Well, I was hoping something would happen because I was there.
Yeah, well, there's certain things that with these guys that you got to kind of not talk about till they talk about it. So I'll leave that one to them.
That's a great segue for the next question then.
Okay. I don't know anything.
I know you don't. I know. Well, we all heard what Dee Snider's been leaking on the internet, but we saw photos of you with the band in Vancouver recording, which is awesome, with their favorite guy, Mike Fraser. Given that, what AC/DC soundbite about these sessions can you exclusively give AC/DC Beyond the Thunder that you haven't told anybody else that you feel comfortable sharing?
Well,
AC/DC Beyond the Thunder theme song, Trailer Trash, written and performed by Gannon Arnold. VO talent by Bruce Jacobson. Cinematography and sound recording by Greg Ferguson. Edited and mixed by Eric Keel. Written, directed, and hosted by Kurt Squires. Produced by Greg Ferguson, Eric Keel, and Kurt Squires. AC/DC Beyond the Thunder is a Squires LLC current motion production. Copyright Beyond the Thunder podcast, all rights reserved. This has been a Nat Attack presentation. Shazbot. Nanu Nanu.